Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar hosted by your very own IOSH Financial Services Group. We're very pleased to welcome Peter Green from RM Associates today. Firstly, for those of you who haven't attended one of our IOSH webinars before, I'm Tony Boff, Chair of the Financial Services Group. So with all that said, I'm going to hand over to Peter, and I hope you enjoy the session.
Hi, thank you. Hello to you all. Hopefully we can spend the next hour looking at Legionnaire's disease from a global perspective. Hopefully we'll look at Legionella bacteria, the disease, and really try and put that in the context about putting in place processes to manage risk, especially within locations that might be offshore and in areas outside the UK. As far as Legionella bacteria is concerned, it is a natural organism. We find it in lakes and rivers, other bodies of water. It can even be found in moist soil. It is believed by the World Health Organization to occur worldwide. So sometimes there's a perception that it might actually not be present in certain countries, but as far as we're concerned, it is everywhere. It is something called ubiquitous. And with respect to everything, and as far as risk in buildings is concerned, the most likely way that it will enter the building water systems that we're in control of will be through the incoming mains. It won't be at particularly high levels, but it will come in nevertheless. As far as the disease is concerned, it wasn't actually recognized until 1977. In 1976, there was a convention in Philadelphia where a number of ex-Legionnaires attended to have a conference. At that time, a lot of them came down with pneumonia. There were 221 cases and there were 34 deaths. In some respects, that might not look as being particularly significant, but as far as pneumonia is concerned, pneumonia tends to affect individuals. It doesn't tend to pick off people in large bodies of large numbers. It took them a year to find out that it was actually a rod-shaped bacteria that caused the problem. They call this bacteria Legionella pneumophila, partly from the fact it affected lots of Legionnaires, lots of Legionnaires, and it gave them pneumonia. As far as the disease is concerned, the disease is no different to any pneumonia that we're going to come across, in that it kills around about 10 people that are infected by it, and it has symptoms which include a cough, a fever, breathing difficulties, diarrhea and delirium. As far as the bacteria is concerned, the Legionella pneumophila bacteria actually belongs to a very large family of organisms. Currently, there have been around about 50 different species of Legionella bacteria identified. Amongst them sits the Legionella pneumophila. The Legionella pneumophila only being one type of Legionella species. However, as far as the Legionella pneumophila is concerned, that type of bacteria is associated with over 90% of the Legionellosis cases that are recorded around the world. Within the Legionella pneumophila family, there are 16 different children. We generally identify those as serogroups, and Legionella pneumophila serogroup 1 is considered the most serious form of the bacteria. So currently we have a very, very large family of Legionella organisms. The Legionella organisms can be distilled into one particular type, which is Legionella pneumophila, and one of its children, one of the subgroups, Legionella pneumophila serogroup 1, will be the one that's most commonly associated with infection and death. As far as the disease is concerned, there's not a fixed way of actually identifying the disease across the world. Depending upon the geographic location will depend upon the amount of interest that the authorities will have with respect to the disease. And so trying to gather together information with respect to how prevalent it is within a particular location can be difficult. Some of this is down to the very fact that there isn't a very well developed diagnostic process or infection control process within a particular geographic location. And so not unusually, you can go to various parts of the world and not actually have really any uptake or any interest with respect to the disease. If we look at some of the areas that are more developed with respect to looking at Legionnaire's disease, places like Europe, Australia, and the USA, typically, if we distill down the rates of infection, there are around 10 to 15 cases detected per million population. So if we try and put that into context, fundamentally, the level of infection is relatively low. You've probably got more chance of winning the lottery in each respective country than you have catching Legionnaire's disease. However, clearly the outcomes, the very fact it could actually lead to death, is something that people really want to try and avoid. As far as the disease is concerned, I suppose the key element is we know that the disease is made up of a type of bacteria. It gives people bacterial pneumonia, but fundamentally with respect to contracting the disease, we have to look at the pathways that's going to occur for us to catch it. Pneumonia is a lung disease. The only way that I can catch Legionnaire's disease is by taking the bacteria and placing it into somebody's lungs. The difficulty comes with respect to Legionnaire's disease in that the bacteria is a waterborne organism. It doesn't fly around, and people might be aware in the news at the moment, we're talking about pneumonia in China, and the big difference between Legionnaire's disease at the moment and the type of pneumonia that people are contracting in China is that the Chinese disease is a viral bacteria. Viruses can tend to float around in the air, be left on surfaces for you to pick them up. Bacteria aren't as resilient. They won't float around. The only way that the bacteria can get from where it is into your lungs is by residing within the medium that it likes. Legionella bacteria likes water, so in order for you to be able to contract the disease, you have to take the bacteria from the water source that it's contained in. You have to then place it into a form that will breach your body's natural defenses, and you will allow the bacteria to drop into your lungs. As a consequence of that, the droplets that you have to breathe in have to be very small. We're talking around about 5 micron droplet diameter, which is 5,000th of an inch, which from the perspective of a droplet, we're really looking at a fine mist or an aerosol, as opposed to the water that will come out of the middle of a shower. Because it's a lung condition, if you drink water containing Legionella bacteria, it is not going to have any material effect on your health. So from the perspective of concern, there isn't a need for people to boil water or to do anything with water that might be used to kill the bacteria condition if all we're concerned about is drinking it. Clearly, any areas of risk will center around being able to form droplets. As far as the bacteria is concerned, it is not considered to be contagious. There's no evidence of person-to-person spread. So fundamentally, that's why the issue in Philadelphia was very significant. Ordinarily, Legionnaire's disease will pick us off one by one. To see an incident where 200 people contracted the disease was extraordinary. And generally speaking, you do not see large infections occur unless there is a massive central source of contamination. There was a massive outbreak in Belgium around about 10 years ago, and that was caused by a spa pool within an exhibition that had been treated. So lots of people were exposed to the mist and the water vapor that came off the top of the spa. As far as the bacteria is concerned, it takes around 2 to 10 days for it to incubate. So generally speaking, what will happen is if you're exposed to the bacteria, it takes a little while to bed itself in, and it can take anywhere up to 10 days to start to grow. Generally speaking, it takes 2 to 3 weeks for people to become sufficiently ill to be hospitalized. And most definitely, as far as the disease is concerned, it will involve hospitalization. It is not one of those, you do not spend at home, as a couple of days at home, recovering to go back to work. It will be something that will mean you'll have to have intravenous antibiotics and a hospital stay. As far as risk profiles are concerned, we all do not carry equal risk. The highest risk groupings are the people that are most vulnerable in society. They will be any patient or any person who is immunocompromised. So if you're on cancer treatments, or you are HIV, anything that might inhibit your immunosystem, you will be vulnerable. And clearly, again, if you're hospitalized, then your level of ability to fight infection goes down, and so you become, say, doubly compromised. So any locations where we have healthcare and we have immunocompromised patients will be of concern. And other factors that can slip into it's almost like the general public, will be the very fact the more male you are, the more vulnerable you are. 3 times more men contract Legionnaire's disease than women. The older you are, the more compromised you are, the more your lung function fails, the more likely you are to be unable to expel the bacteria, and so it gets retained in your lungs, and you're more likely to be infected. And smokers and alcoholics tend to impair lung function, and becomes partially immunocompromised, and so as a result their risk profile goes up. So there are factors that will influence it. It doesn't mean to say that if you're young, fit and healthy and female that you are not at risk, but your ability to come out at the other end is significantly increased the more things that you do not have going against you. As far as conditions for growth, we've already touched on one. Legionella bacteria is very, very specific in that it's an aquatic organism. It's like a fish. It needs water to grow. Anytime you deprive it of its water, it will die. It's like all of us. It needs food. It needs nutrition in order to be able to sustain itself. The nutrition sources that it will generally draw from will be iron oxide or rust, and it will also require other organic material. It will generally feed on matter around it. As a consequence, any environment in which we can grow other bacteria will potentially provide the environment in which the Legionella bacteria will want to sustain itself. And it is not associated with bulk water or fast moving water. Legionella bacteria likes to grow under things. So fundamentally, any condition where we can allow things to settle out, like sediment or scale, or if we can allow other bacteria to form into things called biofilms, will create environments which the Legionella bacteria will feel very happy, and it will be able to sustain itself. The final aspect of conditions for growth will be temperature, and if we consider the rate of growth against temperature, we get peak growth occurring around about 37 degrees. 37 degrees is body temperature, so anytime the Legionella bacteria can get inside you, it will feel very at home. However, as far as the bacteria is concerned, it is basically a single cell. It doesn't have a brain, it doesn't have a consciousness. If I can give it a beaker of water at 37 degrees with the right conditions, it will grow equally as successfully. So any time that we can mimic those conditions within any of the environments we're responsible for, we run the opportunity of growing the bacteria. If we consider temperature specifically, then as far as the growth is concerned, the green sector within the thermometer is the area in which the bacteria will feel the happiest. Anytime I can create a temperature between 20 and 42 degrees, I will have a happy bacteria and the bacteria will feel comfortable to grow. Going back to the growth curve, the temperature between 20 and 30 degrees, the growth curve is fairly shallow. So fundamentally, it would be wrong of me to tell you that as soon as you hit 21 degrees, the bacteria is going to start growing in an uncontrolled fashion. After 30 degrees and up to 42 degrees will be the zone in which it will grow the happiest. Where we have temperatures within those, with that sector, you can move from an in-control position to an out-of-control position within around 72 hours. So as far as the bacteria is concerned, the bacteria does not give you a lot of time to play with. It can grow fairly quickly once it has established itself and it is happy to multiply. If we drop the temperature below 20 degrees, the bacteria doesn't die, but it will basically go to sleep. The bacterial cell, as I say, isn't really, it's alive but not living as far as we're concerned. And fundamentally, the mechanisms which control it will shut down and it will remain dormant until the temperature goes to a level that we're happy with. Once we start to raise the temperature, as we start going above 40 degrees, things will start to happen to the bacterial cell such that at 45 degrees, the cell wall will break down and the insides of the bacteria will spill out and it will die. The rate at which it dies, though, will depend upon how far we move above 45 degrees. At 45 degrees, it can take up to 2 hours to get a proper kill on the bacteria. At 60 degrees, it can take a couple of minutes, and at 70 degrees, we have what's called an instant kill. So fundamentally, the need to keep water hot is quite apparent, because if we just keep water warm or slightly hot, fundamentally, we do not necessarily achieve all we expect to achieve out of it. Understanding the way the bacteria runs, or the bacteria grows and the bacteria can actually infect us, is one part of the argument. There is a responsibility placed on all of us to make sure that clearly we don't create conditions under which we're going to allow the bacteria to grow. Some of the responsibility must fall to local government to instruct users of, especially of public service and public buildings and offices, to be able to minimize the risk on the end user. And what you'll find is that irrespective of your geographic location, many local governments will have guidance in place that will draw from known information within the world. The World Health Organization has been one of the fundamental drivers with respect to this, and they have lots and lots of information with respect to Legionella and Legionellosis, and there are other areas, other geographic areas that have taken up that information and sort of expanded on it. Currently, we have two main sources of higher level instruction. The primary source for most guidance actually comes through the UK, through the Health and Safety Executive, through a document called the Control of Legionella Bacteria in Water Systems, and some associated technical guidance, HSG 274. That's been used as the bedrock for lots and lots of the guidance that's in place at the moment. We also have the European Technical Guidelines, which again draws heavily from the HSE and from UK experience. You'll find the fundamentals, though, behind all management of Legionella risk will by nature of the fact that Legionella bacteria doesn't care where it is in the world, will be the same. Our rules will be the same, no matter where we are. Where we're going to generate hot water, we must keep it hot. The guidance is clear in that we should be trying to achieve 60 degrees on our hot water output in order that we get that quick kill on the bacteria. We need to be making sure that wherever possible, we keep cold water cold. The guidance expects that supply water temperatures are below 20 degrees. We avoid stagnancy, we avoid the sediments and the scales and the biofilms forming by keeping water moving. We need to keep that water moving, and we need to keep systems clean. We need to take away bacterial nutrient wherever we possibly can. As I say, irrespective of where you are in the world, the rules will be the same. The bacteria doesn't behave any differently depending where it is. As far as risk management is concerned, we have a number of key things that we really should be looking to do. The key aspects of risk management are drawn from the guidance offered by the World Health Organization and the European Technical Guidelines. And fundamentally, the key to success really is about making sure that we have control of the situation. And really, there should be a management team responsible for managing risk. That management team can be difficult to control, especially where we may be in a different geographic location to the building of concern. So really, we need to have local and central responsibilities, and we should vocalize, or we should write down what's expected of each of the teams. People should really know what's expected of them and what they should be doing. We need to have a process by which we manage risk. The current requirement, or the current trend, is to have something called a water safety plan. A water safety plan has a number of different components. One of the first components is an understanding of the risk. The risk that is shaped by a building will depend upon where it is, how it's constructed, and importantly, who participates within the building. The type of occupant can materially affect how you view risk. If it's a healthcare premise and we have immunocompromised occupants, then clearly the needs to protect them will be far, far greater if it's just an office building. Once we've assessed the risk, we should understand the range of asset that's on a property. Each property will be different. Some may have cooling towers. Fundamentally, we're not looking at cooling towers within the presentation, but they may have cooling towers which are going to shape risk. Some will have complex hot and cold water systems, which may require a degree of thought. We need to put in place a process where we will monitor key asset to ensure that we can minimize the opportunity for bacterial growth. Within our plan, we need to have a process by which we react to issues. Again, the assumption sometimes within the guidance is that life is perfect and we never ever will breach particular guidelines, but things will always happen, life will be changeable, and we need to build into our processes systems to be able to control that. And we should continue review. The whole aspect of water safety plan is built on the ability to be able to review where you are and be prepared to change if the processes in place aren't working. Most definitely, the key aspects of water safety plans can be centrally managed. They can be centrally controlled as long as you have good reach out to local delivery teams and make sure they're doing what they need to do. With respect to the guidance, all the guidance documents focus on the same sorts of things. Where we have cold water service, we need to make sure that we are monitoring them on a regular basis. Most of the guidelines expect a monthly check on cold water temperatures at the taps. If we have stored water, then we should be checking the tank supply to make sure the tank supply is suitable, make sure there's nothing growing in it, nothing that's fallen in it that will actually sustain bacterial growth. Where we have hot water services, we need to make sure we are hitting the 60-degree target, we are delivering at the taps, and that where we have circulation systems, this water circulates efficiently to attain the hot water at the taps. Like I say, with respect to some of the services out there, I do understand that in a lot of instances, you may not have control over the generation and the storage of water because you are tenants within landlord properties. But fundamentally, you still should understand what is coming through to affect your users of your taps. Where we have showers, we need to make sure they're in regular use. Clearly, out of any device that's going to create a droplet that might expose people to risks, showers form one of those high risk areas. So we need to make sure that people are using them regularly, that they don't become stagnant and allow bacteria to grow in them. And we need to get rid of any debris that might accumulate on them, so they need to be regularly cleaned and descaled. Most of the guidance out there would advocate that to be done at least quarterly. And again, these sorts of things are not difficult to build into local teams to go out and carry out the work. One of the other big issues that we all face is something called low use outlets. I think the perception that everybody uses all of the outlets within the facility all of the time is probably optimistic at best. As far as defining what a low use outlet is, it's normally an outlet used less than weekly. Weekly being the opportunity for bacteria or the water to become stagnant, to warm up or cool down, and then allow the bacterial contaminant to grow. The way that we would manage this would be normally to force flush the outlets that aren't used regularly. Ideally, they should be removed, but clearly if you're within a landlord premise, you might not have the ability to change things and to move things around. So fundamentally, we have to have a process in which we control and manage bacterial growth. Finally, as far as key issues are concerned, with regards to issues that we're going to face, I think one of the primary ones that we are going to come across, and it's probably most prevalent everywhere around the world, is the warming of cold water supplies. Again, I think the desire is to turn the tap on and have icy cold water coming out the tap, but fundamentally that doesn't exist. I think it's been very notable within the UK that during the summer months, trying to achieve less than 20 degrees on the output is sometimes perhaps an idealistic position as opposed to a realistic position. And again, I've got no reason to believe that that issue doesn't exist in other parts of the world. Fundamentally, if we look at the key conditions of controlling bacterial growth, keeping temperatures below 20 degrees is one element of it. Anytime we go above 20 degrees, the opportunity for bacteria to grow will start to increase. The fundamental need to temper that will be to turn the taps on. Anytime we have water moving, we then remove the ability for the bacteria to grow in the pipework. So where we have locations that fail to meet 20 degrees, the key step to ensuring risk is minimized is to make sure that taps are in regular use and we're drawing fresh water through to them all the time. It would be nice to say we could just put a cooling coil on the pipe, but generally speaking, that doesn't really achieve much. Opening the tap is by far and away the best way of managing that risk. We do have issues with low hot water temperatures. Low hot water temperatures sometimes are out of our control, especially in landlord premises. We do not necessarily have the ability to turn up and down the thermostat on the water heater to be able to deliver hot water through. Clearly, there is little that you can do as an end user other than encourage the landlord to turn up the output temperatures and again temper that with flushing. We do have alternatives there where in key high risk areas you can treat the water with alternative chemicals like chlorine dioxide and silver and copper. However, there are within certain, especially within Europe, there is a move away from using chlorine-based disinfectants just because of environmental impact. So fundamentally, you sometimes have a difficulty to manage risk associated with that, just purely from the fact that you don't have flexibility within the local rules. Other issues that can sometimes hamper us will be poor install standards. The UK installation requirements are quite heavily regulated, in as much as that it is actually illegal to install things incorrectly within the UK, whereas I can't say that will be that rule applies everywhere across the globe. And most definitely being able to control and understand how things are installed and changed is a help, and being able to work with local trades can be helpful, and it can actually minimize risk that you're exposing your staff to. And again, finally, there's the effect of low use. I can't stress that any more highly, is that fundamentally within the UK, if you look at the balance of risk and you look at the balance of infection and high bacterial count, I would say the 80% of it will have low use attribute to it in some form or another. So being able to control how people are using taps within your managed environment is essential. Thank you for your time. Hopefully that was helpful.
That was great, thank you. And now we're going to give you the opportunity to post any questions that you've got for Peter. I can see that we've got some in. So my first question I can see here is a comment that they were under the impression that there is no more risk for men than there is for women. Is that anything that you know specifically about? I would imagine that's kind of a doctor-based.
Well, it is. I mean, the facts that are out there at the moment is, and I can speak specifically for the UK, but there is no the facts everywhere else bear out that men do carry 3 times more risk than women. Fundamentally, the part of that is apportioned to the fact that more men generally smoke than women, so they're obviously going to fall into higher risk profiles. But that, again, that would be slightly disingenuous from the point of view that I can't say that everybody that catches Legionnaire's disease smokes. So there is clearly a more complex situation, as you're quite right. I'm not clinical, but fundamentally, the statistics will bear out that men are more at risk than women.
Also, and I know very much we were trying to avoid focusing on any one legislation, because obviously we were trying to do a global perspective, but I have a comment that the Approved Code of Practice within the UK obviously states it's people over 45 years. Obviously we talked about 50,
45. It's again from a clinical perspective, whilst the HSE, I can't run away from the fact that HSE do say 45. From a clinical perspective, over 50 is a higher risk grouping.
Also, if a shower is already in place and it's been allowed to go stagnant, what can we do about that?
Fundamentally, you need to get the shower back into use. One of the critical steps that you probably would consider is, if it's been out of use for a while, it is most definitely worthwhile replacing the shower head and the hose and cleaning things out and disinfecting them, just to make sure that you obviously get a clean base to start with. Because obviously you don't want to just start flushing something, because then you can expose the person doing the flushing to risk that you don't want to expose them to. So the idea is to get to a nice safe base and then start your flushing program.
Oh, this is an interesting question. So does the advice of showers include home showers, and is there something we should promote to our workforce?
Oh, I mean, that's a really, really interesting question, because I'd say, if I take UK legislation, because and the guidance, because they never want to move into the domestic environment. Fundamentally focuses just on the commercial environment. But as I say, it's a bacteria. Bacteria can grow anywhere. So the same risks exist at home. So you would always be recommended to use your shower regularly. You would always be recommended to keep the shower head clean. And again, this probably goes back to what we talked about before, is that from a balance of risk point of view, that we're not exposed, that there isn't a massive risk out there. Fundamentally, if Legionella was impacting upon us all the time, then there would be far more infections. So I don't want people to go away and worry about the very fact that you might not have used your shower for 2 weeks, or the very fact that it looks a little bit dirty, because materially the risk isn't that. I know I'm almost like de-escalating something that I want people to be conscious of, but I don't want people to worry about it.
Yeah, great, thank you. Should care homes operate to HTMs?
Well, currently they are not. They are not duty bound. The argument would be is that if you have any element of Department of Health usage, then you would fall under the HTMs. Having said that, if you read the HTMs and the Approved Code of Practice and HSG 274, there isn't that much difference between the two of them now anyway. So fundamentally, you'll find that if you run to 274, that you will accommodate the vast majority of things that exist within the HTM in any case.
I think you've partly answered this one. So the question is there any chemical available to kill the bacteria?
Yeah, chlorine will kill the bacteria. Just a good old disinfectant. There are other products out there that people will potentially use within systems like chlorine dioxide and silver and copper. Fundamentally, we're trying to avoid the situation by having to use the products. Really, the whole idea is if we've got good system management, we're keeping a hot water hot, a cold water cold, and we're keeping our system moving, then we shouldn't need the benefit of any additional chemicals.
Do you have any tips for the management of Legionnaire risk for emergency showers and eye wash stations, given the fact that obviously they're very low usage?
Yeah, within HSG 274 Part 3, there is quite extensive guidance over what we should be doing with showers. A lot of what we do is tempered over the fact how it's designed, whether it has a water storage tank, but fundamentally we should be cleaning out the heads. We should be flushing them and making sure that they're being used. Fundamentally, there is sort of like there is a risk balance here, in that if I'm going to balance the risk of contracting Legionnaire's disease against being injured by a hazardous substance, then clearly I'd sooner douse myself with water with Legionella bacteria in it than run the risk of being injured by acid or whatever. But there are processes in place, and I would point you to HSG 274 Part 3.
Can you lab test for the bacteria, and should this be an annual control?
Yes, you can. There are two ways. There are two ways out there at the moment. First one is what's called a live culture. So you submit a sample to a laboratory. They basically process the water, and then they grow the bacteria under controlled conditions. That takes around about 10 days. Alternatively, you can use a process called PCR, which is polymerase chain reaction. The PCR, you can get a result within about 48 hours. That basically looks for genetic fragments. So fundamentally, it looks for bits of bacteria, and you can find out if the bacteria is there. With respect to looking for it, the guidance doesn't actually suggest routine testing, and for a very important reason. If you test for bacteria today, given the fact that within 72 hours I can grow high levels of bacteria, fundamentally it doesn't help me with ongoing risk management. If you're using it as a reassurance process, then I wouldn't necessarily argue with you, but fundamentally it doesn't remove your responsibility to do all the other stuff. It's almost the icing on the cake.
I suppose that would be kind of your higher risk premises where you've got vulnerable people.
You may determine to do that in like immunocompromised wards, but fundamentally, like you say, even from that point of view, from a risk capture point of view, doing a test doesn't capture all of the time frame. It will only capture the risk at that moment in time you take the water sample. So, like you say, it can be valuable, but it can't be your only mechanism.
Great, thank you. What additional training and qualifications are available on the subject of Legionella?
There are lots of providers out there that will give city and guilds training with respect to management of Legionella. I mean clearly, it will depend upon who needs the knowledge. I mean, fundamentally, you can say from a management perspective, there's a need to understand the mechanisms behind the bacteria working and what steps we're going to put in place to do it. And really, it's almost like an expansion over what we've talked about today. I mean, fundamental course times can go anywhere from a day to several days. And so from a management perspective, you really want to be armed with all those other bits and pieces. From an operative point of view, it can actually be slightly different in as much as it's good for them to have a basic understanding, but fundamentally the demand then is to make sure that the processes that they're using, they are conversant with. And it's the term that we probably all joker with now. It's about this competency. So if I'm sending somebody to turn a tap on to flush it, do they know what they're doing? Do they know how to do it? If they're taking a temperature, do they know how to do it? And so fundamentally, we look at our training requirements depending upon what we're expecting of people.
Thank you. Are small children and babies at great risk?
No. That's a one thing that's lovely with small children and babies. They normally have if you have a small child, you normally find their lungs are very well developed, so you find that they're more resilient. There is a slight side issue to this with respect to babies and children is clearly if we are creating hot water, we are creating water at 60 degrees, then their susceptibility to very hot water is greater than ours. So we do have to bear that in mind as where we may have children present within buildings, there may have to be additional provision to prevent the very hot water, them being exposed to the very hot water.
How do you record monitoring? Are there examples of prosecutions where the recording was not sufficient, so you couldn't prove it was done?
Yes, well, I think it's a very good point. I think everything that we've talked about is within your water plan. So we could expand on the water plan greatly, but clearly, any time that we are going out to collect data, we need to have a device or a process by which we capture that data and we hold it such that if anything does happen, people can actually see that we're being responsible. Clearly, that will change across the needs for that change across the world. Within the UK, we're expected to keep and retain records for 5 years. So there is a responsibility for people to do that.
Is it possible to manage dead legs, or should they always be removed?
That's a very nice question. Thank you for that one. It depends what you mean by managed dead legs. I think, like I say, from a bacterial perspective, bacteria is very, very small. So any crevice in which water doesn't move creates the opportunity for bacteria to actively grow. Trying to define, I do many courses where people try to define what a dead leg is. And fundamentally, from the perspective of removing risk would be to take away any opportunity for bacteria to grow. So if I was given the option, I would say if you had a pipe that went into a T, I'd take the T away and put in just straight pipe. Then you've totally removed the risk. Anytime you leave any nub of pipe, no matter how long, you have the opportunity for risk to be created. And clearly, the longer it is, the bigger the risk.
I suppose with the principles you said, though, if you had the ability to open it up and flush that water out, I suppose that would help, wouldn't it?
But that's part of assessing the risk. It's saying, what do I have and how do I control what I have? But the very fact that if I have a piece of pipe in which the water has no option but to stay where it is, then fundamentally getting rid of them is far better than leaving them. And I do appreciate from plumbing practice, the temptation is sometimes not to go to the faff of removing the T, because that's the harder bit. To cut a bit of pipe or to leave it at a valve is that gets rid of the issue. However, from a bacterial level, it doesn't necessarily do that.
Do we need to do anything about fire sprinkler systems fed from a storage tank?
well, again, it's back to this balance of risks, say, from the emergency showers. With respect to the fire system, again, from a risk management perspective, the risk of you hurting yourself within a fire is far, far greater than the Legionella risk. So that's an accepted risk. That is based on the understanding that any maintenance work has to be carried out in a controlled fashion. So it shouldn't be a case that people are opening fire hoses up into the car park and spraying them around where you might be exposing people to greater risk. Where we have a situation that the fire system is connected to a common tank that feeds cold water to other outlets, they should be normally what's called a appropriate backflow protection on the outlet. So there will be a check valve or a device on the outlet to prevent the water within the fire system seeping back into the domestic system.
Can Legionella grow in diluted glycol water mix if allowed to sit stagnant in a warm environment?
I should do that for my PhD project. I have no idea. I mean, glycol will act as a bacterial nutrient. Legionella isn't a very, and again, I'm speaking a bit out of term in this, in that Legionella isn't a very, it's a bit of a fussy eater, and it doesn't particularly metabolize lots of things that other bacteria will find acceptable. So my guess would be no, but we should try it sometime, and I'll come back to you on that.
Can the bacteria only exist in ferrous containers?
No, it can exist any. Not wanting to open up the definition of container too far, but it can exist anywhere where we're going to create the conditions for. So if it's wet, got nutrients and the right temperature, it will grow.
What are your thoughts on TMVs and how to measure temperatures?
TMVs for the uninitiated, it stands for thermostatic mixing valves. So we talked about exposing children to risk. One of the devices that would protect a child would be to place a device on the end of the system whereby it takes hot water and mixes it with cold water, and out of the tap comes warm water. And so what it does is protect the end user. So from a need requirement, so from an end user protection point of view, thermostatic mixing valves can be quite important because it allows us to create hot water and yet let a wide group of people use the outlets. Having said that, if we have environments whereby everybody is capable and everybody can control their own actions, then perhaps putting a TMV on is not particularly appropriate, because one of the downsides of a TMV is we're creating a direct link between the hot and cold system. So should the TMV fail, I can push hot water into the cold and I can push cold water into the hot. So I can create environments in which bacteria will grow. So fundamentally, they have a value, but we should be careful how we use them, because the more we use them, the more challenge we put into the system. And from a maintenance perspective, if we put a TMV in, we've assumed responsibility for scald risks for the end user. So we've then brought in an additional set of maintenance requirements, so which we have to be mindful of.
In NIRQIA, recommended flushing of infrequently used outlets is twice a week. Does this apply to any other environments? I'm not familiar with that one.
NIRQ. Well, the minimum requirement for flushing, which I've used within the presentation, is weekly, and that's a fundamental. That's the fallback point set by the HSE, by the World Health Organization, by people who consider risk. That's not my set point. The twice weekly flushing came in as part of the Department of Health consideration of risk way back in 2008. And what you'll find is that the way that we consider risk in higher risk areas has now mutated slightly within the current issue of HTML 401 that came out in 2016, in which what high risk environments are expected to consider the impact of flushing and whether or not it needs to be done more than weekly, what you'll find is most trusts within the UK still flush twice weekly, and that twice weekly is based around the 72-hour growth period that we talked about at the beginning of the presentation. However, in ultra high risk areas, people will flush daily. That's where your risk assessment comes in. It's about looking at the end user and the consequences of not doing certain things.
Which I suppose reinforces the importance of the water safety plan that you mentioned in the presentation.
And the water safety plan is a bespoke document to each and every location, because fundamentally, whilst the framework might be able to be lifted, you might have a corporate framework that you can lift from one area to another. As soon as you go into that area, the local site conditions will determine how the plan is shaped.
Is there a chemical to flush through systems which will identify contamination?
Not that I'm aware of. Like a sort of
a different colour or something.
Like to make sure you've cleaned your teeth properly. I don't know. There probably is, but can't imagine anybody that would use it.
What about caravan showers, etc., that have been closed for the winter period?
Well, and again, that's part, we go back to the plan. I think anywhere where you were going to have, I think I generally refer to those as void properties. So if you're dealing with like caravans, you can go, but if people are managing residential accommodation or rental residential accommodation, soon as somebody leaves the space, that space becomes low use. And so fundamentally, you need to have two processes within your water safety plan. One will be void property management. So am I isolating it? Am I isolating it and draining it? Am I flushing it? How am I going to hold position until somebody occupies? And prior to occupation, then you need to have almost like a recommissioning process by which you would go in, you may need to flush, disinfect, turn the water heater up, make sure it's working, do all kinds of things. So you would have a set of conditions that you'd want to fulfill prior to releasing that caravan or apartment to an individual.
And I'm going to jump ahead by a couple of questions, just because I think this relates to what you just talked about. How long should you run a shower to flush it when you're doing a weekly flush?
What the guidance says, you should flush it at least until the water that's coming out of it represents the normal supply temperature, which is a bit spurious, really. So generally speaking, people will try and, if you're trying to fix, again, it depends who does it. It depends how, I don't mean this in any disrespect, it depends how intelligent you are, is that you don't necessarily want to walk around with a thermometer. Some people would just like flush for it used to be 3 minutes, 5 minutes. You need to run it for sufficient time for the fresh supply to get through to the tap.
And with respect to swimming pools, both public and private, what control measures should be in place?
There will be, out of anything that's regulated, there will be a greater degree of regulation on swimming pools. And fundamentally, you could argue that Legionella is least of your issues with respect to swimming pool. So the control measures that are in place are perhaps to control other things that might inadvertently find their way into the swimming pool. I'll draw a veil over it.
Thank you. I'm conscious we have lots of questions, and we're actually drawing towards the end. I'm just going to take one more, and then we'll endeavour to get back to everybody who's asked a question. So as the last question, can a designer or installer be held accountable for engineering risk into a water system, or does all responsibility fall to the duty holder of the property?
I can't. I can specifically say what happens with respect to the UK. I can't necessarily extend that to every single geographic location around the world, but most definitely within the UK, unfortunately, the person who owns the project, be it the client, will still hold responsibility. They're expected to go through due diligence, and they have a duty of care to make sure the designers that they use are fit and appropriate. Doesn't mean to say that they can't be held partially accountable, but fundamentally it still sits with the client. It would be nice to think, I don't have many examples whereby the designers have been held accountable. It's sad, really, but it should be the case.
Thank you, and I'm just going to end this session by thanking Peter once again for coming and doing this for us. Also, thank you to everybody who's joined the webinar today. Thinking about the CPD, because obviously as a IOSH member, we all have to make sure our CPDs are all up to date. Here's a couple of points to maybe reflect on. So what did you learn that was new? What will you be doing with the knowledge you've gained from this webinar? How will the skills you've learned be applied to the way that you work? We will be sending out the link to the presentation recording to the email address you've registered with, so please do look out for the email, and thank you very much.